Hi there, this is Dawn with Wise Women Corner coming to you with a deck review. I have done a couple now of decks that I would consider a little more intermediate to advanced as far as your reading skills go. So I thought I'd take a step back and talk about a deck that is a little more simple, one that a lot of people say you recommend that you start with, which is the Ryder-Waite deck. And I personally don't read with the Ryder-Waite. There's nothing wrong with the deck. It was never anything I jived with. So I didn't even own the deck, to be honest with you, until I decided to go to this project. So I'm not necessarily going to review this deck. What I will talk about, though, is the artist who created this deck, because I think that's the more fascinating aspect of this deck, is the fact that, number one, it's lasted as long as it has, because it was originally published in 1909, and the person that really created the deck, her name wasn't even on it when it was published. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is Pamela Colman Smith. I got hold of this book, and I will tell you that this book is awesome, but it's extremely expensive. Even if you go for the e-reader version of it, it's pretty darn expensive. But I started reading it because I didn't know anything about her, and I always, really wondered why she wasn't even on the deck, as far as ownership goes. And so I did read it, and she led a fascinating life. She was born in London in 1878. She traveled the world. She was a renowned artist. In fact, she made a name for herself by being an intuitive artist, which she would listen to music, and as the music was going, she would just, start doing art. And so it was some of her more famous stuff, some of her better stuff was inspired by music she was listening to at the time. And so that's definitely so if you're interested in art, if you're interested in history, if you're interested in tarot history, I would definitely see if you can convince your library to get this book, or borrow it from a friend who managed to get their hands on it. But it's a great book. So the history of the deck itself, again, it was published in 1909 by the Ryder Company. That's how the Ryder name got on the deck. The gentleman whose name is on it is Ryder-Waite. Ryder-Waite was an author at the time that Pamela Colman Smith was renowned for her artistry, and he actually commissioned her to do the cards. And they were both in a group at the time called the Order of the Golden Dawn. I'm not going to get into that because that's an entirely different it's definitely going to be a different conversation, but that's how they knew each other. And so he commissioned her to do this art for these decks, and after it was over, he claimed that most of the art, and he took a lot of credit for what she had done, saying that he coached her or guided her in some of the imagery and everything. And she herself said she snuck in a lot more of herself in the imagery than he would like to admit. So both of them walked away not entirely, you don't know what the truth was, but I do find that interesting that they both have a different version of what happened. Also, both of them, even though they were renowned in their day, you wouldn't know anything about either one of them and what they existed, because even though their names were well known then, nothing else but this deck really took hold in society. So without this deck, we would probably not know either one of their names. So I thought that was interesting. So the reason why this deck is important in tarot history is because it's the first modern deck with images on all of the cards, not just the major arcana. There was a deck called the sorry, I'm looking at my notes. The Sola Busca deck, which was on display at the British Museum at the time that Pamela Coleman Smith was doing this deck. So, and there are several cards that look like they were inspired by that deck. So there was a deck before this that did have images on all the cards, but this was the first modern deck. And you'll notice if you get other decks that a lot of their images take at least a little bit of inspiration from the Ryder-Waite, which is why everybody says start with this deck. And honestly, like, there's different versions. There's the Ryder-Waite, there's this one, which is actually called the Centennial Edition. You've got Ryder-Waite, you've just got the regular Waite, you've got the Smith-Waite. It's all the same images. Some of the coloring is different. This is actually one of her not tarot card inspired paintings. So that's why that's on this deck, is more because it celebrates her and not necessarily the deck itself. But if you look on the other side, you've got your traditional Fool deck. There's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of deeper meanings in some of the imagery. So when you're reading, it's easier to pick up on maybe what the intent is. So when you're learning the cards, you can kind of differentiate between this and that kind of thing. So I think that's one of the reasons why they recommend it. This particular edition, this deck, was actually put out in celebration of Pamela Coleman Smith and the centennial of the deck itself. And I will tell you that they said that it came out originally with a companion book and some of prints of hers, and it sold through fast. So what they did was they went ahead and just did a deck by itself rather than the whole set, and that's what I've got. And it did come with a little card that's got tiny little versions of stuff of hers that weren't tarot related. So but honestly, I'm sure you can look online or you can look at this book, but her paintings and her artistry are awesome. I can see on some of the cards her influence a little bit more, comparing it to artistry of hers that's outside of this deck. So yes, I would recommend this deck if you're a beginner, or I would recommend it if you're even advanced, if you don't have any dealings with the Ryder-Waite. I would definitely see maybe getting it or looking at it, just because it's a little bit universal as far as the tarot world goes. I don't think you can escape the Ryder-Waite if you're in the biz, so to speak. But again, if you are like me and are more inclined to other things, like the whimsical, like I am, the dreamy stuff, then it's probably not going to speak to you. Don't be alarmed if you are starting out reading and you find decks that you don't connect with. There's nothing wrong with not connecting with a deck. Honestly, it's how your mind is going to connect with different artists, different intentions. Now that I know a little bit about her, I can go back. It's still not speaking to me, unfortunately, but I do feel that I can at least appreciate the history and the artistry that went into it a little bit more. So that is my take on the Ryder-Waite. Hopefully that was helpful for you, and maybe if you know somebody who's just getting initiated into the tarot world, you won't be afraid to kind of hook them up to it. There is a couple of, there's the Ryder-Waite, which a friend of mine did read with, and I think that is a little bit better than maybe just the regular Ryder-Waite, simply because it's the same imagery, but just a little bit brighter. The colors are a little bit, they stand out a little more. So you might want to look at the different versions of the Ryder-Waite before you jump into one. So even if you're going with it, you can still kind of maybe find one that you connect with a little bit stronger. All right, well, that is my take on the Ryder-Waite. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm really working on getting it, doing videos a little bit more often. Also, follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I do a daily forecast with a card of the day. Sometimes I pull live. And I'm hoping to go live a little bit more often. And please comment, let me know if this was helpful for you, if there's something else that you want to see, recommend decks that you would like to see reviews on. Actually, I have a friend who is putting out their own deck, and as soon as that gets published, I'm going to order one and maybe do a review of that. So just kind of stay tuned. So you have a good one, and happy reading.